Everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our long-running series, the Unported Playlist, where I take a look at some of my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And I've got a really fun episode for you guys, because we're talking about The Fallen Angels, developed by Steel Hearts and published by Psiyko. Now this game exists, you can play it, but it is not finished, nor is anyone under agreement as to whether or not this game actually released as an unfinished game, or if it was never actually released. There is no determination on that, but what I can tell you is it's real, and we can play it, and it is here for you guys to watch now. Before we get too far involved though, hit like, subscribe, all that jazz. There's a Patreon link down below as well if you feel so inclined. But if you can't tell already, and I'm sure you can, this is a 2D versus fighting game, and there is some strong vibes going on here. I will say off the top, the level of animation in the sprites is superb. We're talking about Art of Fighting 3 from SNK levels, and it's interesting I mentioned SNK because there is a connection to them as well that we'll get into in a little bit. But this game definitely has style. It feels like it's 95% finished and a little bit rough around the edges, but the background right off the top feels completely different than anything else you'd expect to see in a 2D fighting game, because it kind of has that pre-rendered vibe to it. And you'll see that table fly into the screen almost like a 2D polygon effect. It is just a blast to look at in motion. It is a very pretty game as far as the animation and backgrounds are concerned, but I will say the color profile is quite drab. We're kind of getting to those Call of Duty browns a full decade before they would become prevalent. But it's a really interesting look at a game that was not finished, and even more so interestingly, it's been stated that developers are going to finish this game and release it to arcades and consoles in the future. Now with the recording of this voiceover, there has been no more news about that, but apparently there are plans to finish this game and release it, because in the character roster screen there's a good amount of characters, but apparently in the game ROM data dump there's 4 other characters that are close to finish that are not available in this current build, so it seems like there's probably more game and more stages that you'll be able to see if and when this game actually does get finished and released. And that's why, if you haven't noticed already, there's not as many backgrounds as I would normally like to show you in a fighting game. I just have to talk about what's here. But what's here is a very promising game that's unfortunate that it hasn't been finished as of the making of this video. And it is really interesting when a game, people can't decide if it was actually released or not. It's quite possible that it had a very limited print run on PCB, maybe even just a location test in Japan. But it's not often that I get to say on Unported Playlists that people can't actually decide whether or not a game released or not. Most of the time that I talk about prototypes, they never actually got a release, and people agree that it was never actually a game. In this instance with The Fallen Angels, we just really don't know, but you'll see there that I won another match. This game and the AI, because it is unfinished, will do some real strange things. You'll see in the next match and a couple matches beyond that. Sometimes your AI opponent will just stand there and do nothing but block, and sometimes they'll just stand there and get completely hit in the face. Not a good fighting technique, but it's just one that seems to happen. But again, moving on, the background looks really pretty. It just doesn't have the color profile that I would love to see. I love how SNK would make things more colorful, but I know I said that there's an SNK connection, and that's because some of the developers that worked on this game went back to SNK, and there's definitely some Geru and some King of Fighters vibes here. Some of the characters feel like they're Bizarro universe versions of SNK fighters, and if you notice the connection, that's why you noticed it, because there's definitely some graphical sharing going on here. But this game also has a really interesting soundtrack for what's here, so go ahead and listen for like 45-50 seconds. I'll come back and talk more about the history of the Fallen Angels. Enjoy! It's a solid soundtrack, nothing spectacular, and we don't even know if it's finished or not. That just could be a placeholder, but you'll see here in the character selection screen, basically select a character, it jumps right into the match. There is no real transition or setup for the match like most fighting games would have, and that's how you know it is unfinished. But it is possible this game did release. One arcade magazine said it was the 11th most successful game on the show floor when it came out, so we don't really know what happened, and I always love that that's the fact, that I can't actually make a definitive statement in one direction or the other. But what I can say is this background at least doesn't really look finished to me. It looks like it's half painted in. Those tires basically have no texture whatsoever, and everything feels very flat. And that's what you're going to find when you play the Fallen Angels. The gameplay mechanics, especially for playing against a human opponent, seem to be 100% there. Every character has their moveset, they've got their specials, everything seems to work. But some stages like this here, it just doesn't look like the artwork is done, and there's no real-time, quote-unquote real-time lighting effects going on over top of the artwork. And I really do hope that this is actually true and this game is going to get finished and released, because I would love to see what the actual full Fallen Angels experience is supposed to be, because all we can talk about is what is here. And that's why when I talk about prototype or unfinished arcade games, I generally don't give them a quote-unquote review, because it's hard to review an unfinished product. I just say whether or not it makes sense that the game was cancelled or not finished. And in this instance, I don't think it should have been cancelled. I think they probably should have finished up production and gone with it. Maybe they ran out of money, maybe they couldn't keep going. It is really hard to say. But moving on again to another area, this one again looks unfinished. Sure, there's some lighting going on, there's a little bit of flickering and some flies around the light, but I feel like there should have been more in the background here. I don't know why those jail cells are completely empty. Sure, one has some bent bars on it, but otherwise not much to see. And like I said, mechanically the game just sometimes does some strange things. I'm just going to double perfect cool here, and that's because for the most part he's just going to stand there and do nothing but block in the corner. And it seems like it's not just graphically that this game is incomplete. It seems like, I'm not sure if it's just a random circumstance or a certain combination of characters, but sometimes your opponent is just going to do nothing but let them get their ass absolutely handed to them, and you see that he calls you dirty stinking scum. The story is non-existent in this game. It is just an experience to be had playing against the CPU or against a human opponent. There's just not any depth here story-wise, because clearly, again, it wasn't finished. But it is a very pretty game to look at in the sprites. I will say this is some of the best 2D animation work I've seen in a long time. You definitely have to give them credit for that. And just moving around the character selection screen, just to give you a little bit better of a sense of the different characters you can have, Roche here is just a really weird bob haircut looking sort of demon dude. Not sure exactly the story going on in the game, because just not there, so I have to make some interpretations. And you will see that we're in this closed bar scene again. I love diversifying footage in fighting games and showing you the most amount of backgrounds I can, and after capturing for almost an hour, this is the most amount of backgrounds I saw. So I'm really not sure if there's more. They just didn't come up for me. But it's a fun experiment to play a game that's not done. You can kind of suss out in your head whether or not it should have been finished. Like I said earlier, I wish this game had been finished, and I love the fact that it actually could be. I don't think I've ever mentioned on Unported Playlist before a game that wasn't done that has plans to actually get finished. And if it, got completed this year, 2023, that would be almost 30 years after this game was supposed to be released. It would be amazing to see something like that happen, because it's not something that I don't believe has ever happened before. But leave me a comment down below and give me an example of a game that was cancelled and not finished back in the 90s that ended up coming out in the 2020s. If there is an example, I would love to hear it. But again, this is a game that a lot of you requested me to make an episode on, and a lot of the prototype fighting games I've been talking about recently seem to do really well, so hopefully this one does too. But if you're looking for something new and unique to play, you could do a lot worse than the Fallen Angels. If you like to look at games from a development standpoint and see what an unfinished game looks, sounds, and plays like, then definitely give the Fallen Angels a try. This is the type of game, and maybe by the time this episode is out, I do record them in advance, it could have more news about the re-release. I hope so, and if it does, I will change the video description to mention it. But this is the type of game, download the ROM, load it up in MAME, and you can play an unreleased fighting game out of Japan. Short of that, I'll be back next Monday with an episode of the Unported Playlist. I'll have videos throughout the week as well, but yeah, the Fallen Angels, you can play it today. Bye-bye.